form, shall we? I'm going to get rid of this stuff. I'm going to get rid of all of it, except for the H1. And let's make a form. What HTML element do you suppose that is? Probably form. Our form does not need an action. The action attribute tells it what URL it's submitting to. We're just handling it with JavaScript, so we don't need an action at all. The default, incidentally, is the current page. So it will submit to itself if you don't tell it otherwise, which has a side effect that we're going to have to deal with in a bit. Inside the form, we should put an input. So let's do that thing. Input. Type equals text. There are several types. Text is the default, but we'll be explicit. Type equals text. We could give it a name if we wanted. How about name equals, what are we typing in here? Spell name, something like that. An input is an empty element. That is, there is no closing tag. You do not say slash and say it wanted to do form, because closing an input doesn't make any sense. It has no contents. If you want to specify an initial value, you use the value attribute, but we're not doing that. Then we should probably have a button. To add this spell to our spell book. Just like an input can have a type, so can a button. If a button is located inside a form, submit is the default type, but we will be explicit anyway. Say type equals submit. You may have discovered you can also say input type equals submit. It didn't do the right thing. Now I know. I was curious. Input type equals submit. If we say value equals, do it. See how that looks? And we get two buttons. So input type submit. Same thing, basically. Difference being a button can actually have contents, which means you're not limited to just text. You could put an image in there or something if you wanted to. You could put any HTML between the opening and closing tags, and it'll be part of your button. So I prefer button to input. All right. Probably doesn't do much yet. So let's have a look at our JavaScript. Keep my HTML up over here. So I say we stop listening for the button to be clicked and instead listen for the form to be submitted. There's more than one way to submit a form. A very common way is to hit enter while one of the form fields has your cursor's focus. So instead of grabbing the button, I'll grab the form. So const form equals document.querySelector. Form should be fine. It's the only one on the page right now. Change heading is still fine. For right now, we could even have it change it to your old spell book instead of what we type. One thing at a time. Let's not change everything before we start testing this. Make a few changes, see if it does what you expected so far. Good idea, so you can find your mistakes early. Instead of button add event listener click, it's the form now, right? It's the form that we're waiting for something to happen to. And we're not waiting for the form to be clicked, we're waiting for the form to be submitted. We're going to have it just call the same old function. And let's see what happens. Doesn't matter what I type right now, right? Let's just submit the thing. Oh. Saw a little red thing there. What did it say? Yeah. Well, shucks. I wish I could pause the execution right after that happens. Ooh, pause the execution. Like a breakpoint. Ever use breakpoints in a debugger? Guess what? We can do it in JavaScript. That means actually halt execution at a certain point before it keeps going so that we can see what all our variables are set to at any given point in the execution. Because sometimes you're just like, okay, on line 10, that variable must not be what I think it is, but I have no idea what it is. You could add a console log or something, but debugger sometimes is just much easier. So we can do that. So how about inside our change heading function, I just throw debugger. That's all it is, just a line that says debugger. Don't forget not to commit this kind of stuff, but it's very helpful for troubleshooting. So let's check it out. Doesn't matter what I type or if I type anything. Didn't hit it fast enough. Maybe if I put it right at the beginning here. Refresh. There we go. Paused in debugger, and it shows me the line where I am. So let's see. Oh, P special. Not there anymore, right? That's my problem. I want the H1 again. I'll unpause by hitting the little play button here. Now everything should be great, right? Doesn't matter what I type or if I type anything. I still have the debugger in there. What? I've been betrayed. Let's get the debugger out of there. Let's try that again. It changed. I saw it. I saw ye old spellbook. Good enough. Meets the requirements. Ship it. Customers don't deserve any better. Yes, they do. We have more respect for our users than that. But the specs didn't say change the text and stay on the page, did it? It just said change the text. The text did change. I saw it. No, not acceptable, folks. We need to fix this. So what's happening? Some events have some sort of default behavior in HTML. Clicking a button that is not inside a form, by default, doesn't do a darn thing. Clicking a submit button inside a form, or submitting the form by any other means, does have a default behavior. Remember the action attribute that I got rid of? That tells it what page to submit to. If you take it out, it just submits to itself. But what that means is it refreshes the page. That is the default action for form submission. It changes pages by default, even if it's to its own. So let's look more carefully at that. I've been using the back button here. Let's do that again. And you see the URL actually changes to index.html, spell name equals whatever I typed. So it's actually submitting the form to the same page. And that's getting rid of all the changes that we made to the DOM. So we need to stop that from happening. So let's see what we could do. I'm going to put a debugger back in here, just so we can play around with it. Okay, let's submit. Here we go. We're paused. So we're inside change heading. Down here I can see my local scope. This is the form. This. That? What? What's all this about? I can't even say this without saying this. One of these days, we're going to have to look into this thing. The only thing more confusing than the name JavaScript. What else do we have here? So right now, anything I type in the console, it will be like I'm typing it on the first line of change heading. Let's see, is there arguments? Inside a function, you can get the list of arguments that were passed into the function by typing arguments. That's always available to you. So, interesting thing about JavaScript, it does not enforce the number of arguments. You can always pass in more than it asked for, and you can always pass in fewer than it asked for. Now, you can write the function so that it manually checks that you passed in the right arguments, but the language is not going to ever enforce that. So we don't have any arguments in our parentheses here. But we're not the ones executing change heading, are we? JavaScript's doing it for us. We're not the ones who put the open close parens there. At some point, when the form is submitted, JavaScript's doing that part for us. So it could be it's passing in arguments that we didn't ask for. And wouldn't you know it, it is. It's passing in one argument that is of type event. Whoops. Which has all kinds of crazy stuff in it. Look, event type submit. So it's a submit event. So that event is actually a thing. It's actually an object, and it gets passed in as an argument to our event handler. So a function that is handling an event, that is, it's the thing that occurs, it's the function that runs when an event occurs, is called an event handler. And anytime you have an event handler, JavaScript will automatically pass in an argument to your function that is the event itself, this event object. So just to let myself know that it's there, I'm going to go ahead and put something in my argument list. I'm going to call it EV. That's just what I always use. I don't use E because I use E for error a lot. EV is pretty common. You like to be explicit with your variable names, but for an event inside an event handler, EV is adequate. Default prevented false. So we said there is a default action for form submission, right? Which in this case is refreshing the page. We want that to be true. We want default prevented to be true. If we wanted to write that as a verb to make it happen, how would you write that? Default prevented is telling us that it already happened. How would you write that if you were prevent default, right? That's the command you would give it. Wouldn't it be nice if that were a thing? It's a thing. Sweet. Arguments. So arguments, square bracket 0 is our event. I'm just going to save that to a thing real quick. Const ev equals arguments, square bracket 0. Let's check that real quick. Ah, shucks. Not defined. Why not? That's mean. Well, never mind. We've got it right here, right? We've got event in the argument list now. Let's refresh the page. Let's try again. All right, now I have event, right? What? That's weird. What are you doing, debugger? Not saved. Not saved. Notice looking at my sources tab, it shows me my code, and I see it's not there. So I know it's not that my code doesn't work, it's that I didn't save it. Try that one more time. Refresh. Let's submit it. Let's check out EV. Good, it's the event. EV dot prevent default. There it is. So prevent default is a function. Prevent default, open close paren. Let's unpause the debugger. And it changes, and it doesn't change the page.
So now do we add that to our code?
And notice earlier when I put the debugger at the after this, it was too late, right? The page had already refreshed by the time it got there. So we want to make sure we prevent default the very first thing inside the event handler. ev.prevent default, open close parens, should stop the page from refreshing. Let's try it out. Refresh. Tappity tappity. It works. Changes it without refreshing the page. It's not using what we typed in yet, but it is doing it in response to a form submission instead of just clicking a button. which seems like progress. We put some work in, we made a thing work, so I'm going to go ahead and commit. But let's talk a little more about what we're doing when we commit.